So my name is Jenny Gove, and I'm really honored to be here today to talk with you about mobile design. So I'm going to start with telling a story about our two mobile platforms, the mobile web and native apps, setting what you're seeing here at the conference in context. And then in looking at design patterns and principles, we're going to talk about flow and navigation. We'll be looking at system patterns and material design. And then we'll look at some of the mobile principles that we have that are based on user data. And we'll end with some pointers for user testing. So the focus of this conference is on the latest and greatest technologies that you can learn about and apply to your work, as it should be. There have been many topics, such as those that you see here in the word cloud, that in some cases you've gone into real depth on. That's included tools for increasing performance, exploring IoT and Android things, the Google Assistant, conversational apps, details of progressive web apps, and more. You've covered many technical issues so far, and tools and features that you as developers need to be aware of. I'm going to be taking a different approach for the first part of this user experience talk. We're going to take a look at a short history, just for fun, of how the tech media has characterized the mobile web and apps. So this is just going to be a bit different. You can come on with me on this journey. And we're going to see how they've engaged with this over the years, taking us to the point where we are now, that native apps and the mobile web both matter very much, and that there are use cases for each, and that both are developing in really interesting and important ways. So let me start by asking you a question. When was it that the web was first declared to be dead? Have a think about it. Any ideas? You could do a search for it, which ironically you'd probably use the web, but okay, so I'll put you out of your misery. It was in 1997 by Wired magazine, and they had an article which they titled "Push, Kiss Your Browser Goodbye, the Radical Future of Media Beyond the Browser." So that was back in 1997 that they were declaring the web to be dead. And then in 2010, Steve Jobs made this statement, that people aren't searching on their mobile devices as they do on desktop. What's happening is that they're spending all their time in apps. That same year, Wired published a piece with a now much riffed on title, "The Web is Dead, Long Live the Internet." And then just a few short years later, there were headlines like this, that mobile app usage increases in 2014 as mobile web surfing declines. In fact, there were a succession of such quotes and headlines. So the web is dying and apps are killing it, the decline of the mobile web and things like that. So why were there headlines like this? What was fueling it? Well, it was because of a study that was published by a company called Flurry. And they found that on mobile devices, only 14% of the time is spent on the mobile web, while 86% of it is spent in apps. And studies by Comscore and Nielsen found similar. So let's take a look at where the stats on this lie today. It's pretty similar. Today, we know that on mobile devices, only 12% of the time is spent on the mobile web, while 88% of it is spent in apps. This is a study by Comscore, and other research companies have found similar. But how exactly are people spending their time with apps? So the answer is that they're spending their time primarily in social networking, in music, games, multimedia apps, and more. 2/3 of the time are spent using apps with regards to entertainment or communication. So while it is indeed a great deal of time that people spend using apps, it's not evenly distributed across verticals. So they found stats like this back in 2014 too. But when people started looking at this more closely, there were some telltale signs that the mobile web had some great things going for it too. So when they started to research more, started looking at the data, they found that the mobile web accounted for more traffic for many verticals than mobile apps. For example, this chart, this was from a year later in 2015. It shows that retail and finance and travel typically see 50% or higher proportion of their visits from the mobile web. So data like this led people to question some of those sort of more simplistic stats that were put out that seemed to imply that native apps were becoming the only important platform on mobile. So this kind of data provided further details, and that led to the headline, The web is dying. Wait, how are you reading this? I love that one. And so then there were lots of U-turns. Let's have a look. Not so fast on the death of the mobile web. Is the web dying? No. Mobile web might not be dead after all. Long live the mobile web. And Wired, in contradiction to their famous article of 2010, in 2014 claimed that the web is not dead. And then 2 years later, the web is not dead after all. Google made sure of that. And that reported about the advancement of activities that can be done in the browser and the early successes of progressive web apps. The article ended by saying, the truth is that App Universe and the web are not mutually exclusive. We use both. Just maybe the web is more alive than ever. Now, more recently, the headlines have shifted to focus on apps. But they're kind of more tempered now, or positioned to be taken a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, learning lessons from the rounds of headlines that came before that was focused so assuredly on the death of the web. Authors and editors now know that the analysis is more complex and that there are multiple changes happening, changes in the web and the app ecosystem, and opportunities with burgeoning technologies like AR and VR, virtual reality, augmented reality. Apps themselves are also evolving, incorporating more activities and more services in some cases, increasing the time that's spent within them. So now we get headlines like this. Very alarmist, right? The app is dead, long live the app. Apps are dead, it's all about channels in 2017. And this one, I think, is the most important. You know, mobile apps aren't dead, they're evolving. All these things are evolving, and we're at a very interesting juncture. And we know that there are some native apps that are doing very, very well, that broke into the market very recently, ride-sharing apps and food ordering apps and more. There exist huge businesses, such as Mintra, and Make My Trip, and Voot, that have built their businesses primarily on apps. And we all know of some businesses that are app-only and have been very successful. Indeed, our company, Google, have released a number of app-only products ourselves. So we have our Trips app for planning and booking travel. We have Ario, our food ordering and home services app for our India market. And we have Taze, our Indian-based payment app. There are other businesses that recognize themselves as being mobile web-focused or are turning to the web now. Flipkart, the large Indian online retail store. And interestingly, JioCinema, here in India, they recently have gone to the web for the first time with a progressive web app. And then I want to highlight West Elm. They're a furniture store in the US, and they've never developed a mobile app, a native mobile app, that is. Their VP of Innovation, Luke Chatelain, explained this clearly at a retail conference earlier this year when he said that, well, people just don't buy a couch on their phone every day. And another way of saying this is, you know, make sure you understand your user behavior and do what's right for your users, for your business, in a way that really meets those users' needs. Indeed, his insight is very spot on. In a study I conducted earlier this year, participants often explained that they tend not to download apps unless they decide they could really use them a lot. So it's all about frequency often, because of the download process and so forth. It, you know, adds something else to their phone. So some of them say it adds clutter to their phone. And of course, apps take up storage on the phone. In our studies, we found that this was a burden for some of our participants in the US. And other studies have found that in India, 33% of users run out of storage every day. So we know from user research that users like the convenience of launching apps from the home screen, if it's something that they will turn to regularly. If you've been following the PWA developments, launching from the home screen is no longer the domain of native apps only, but also can be available for web apps, as seen here with this example of the Trivago app, which is a hotel booking app. In all, what's happening is that we're making the user experience across both platforms, web and app, we're making them both better and kind of making up for the deficiencies that each have. And as part of doing this, we've created more tools for developers that can help with user experiences, like polymer elements for the web and material design for both web and app. And there's already availability of tools to help with speed and performance on the web, which is so critical for user experience. And for native apps, there's Android Studio with all the tools built into that, and Firebase is a suite of tools to aid app developers, as can be seen here. So here we have things like Test Lab and Analytics, and Firestore, which there's been a talk about here at this conference, and A/B testing, and many more tools. So the two platforms, mobile web and app, are now addressing the user experiences that they have been deficient in. We're helping users discover and experience native apps more readily through encouraging developers to create instant apps. And you can see an example here from jet.com. And we're helping developers create apps with speedier downloads that take up less storage on the device. And on the web, we're encouraging developers to create offline experiences so that experiences on the web stay engaging. And the progressive web app technologies that enable this, Service Worker and the Cache API, not only handle offline, but also provide resilience to network problems. And we're encouraging developers to re-engage users through notifications as well, as you can see here in this example Flight app. So these capabilities for engagement and re-engagement on the mobile web, they didn't exist before, so we're really trying hard to think about this. So the changes to both of these platforms are really fantastic. As I said, it's evolving. As you've already heard at this conference, many sites are pushing these modern features of the web, from AMP to Service Worker, to add to home screen, to push notifications, to sign in, to better payment systems. These companies want to deliver better mobile website experiences. And this is just a map of some of the samples of brands that are raising the bar globally. And India has been especially rapid in adopting this technology. It's leading the world in many cases in terms of its progressive web app development. But in addition to some of these cutting-edge technologies, at the fundamental level, we have to provide really great mobile experiences, great design. We do this through the provision of creating great design. And for this talk, I've chosen to review some elements of mobile navigation, because that's common no matter what vertical you're working within. So this should be applicable to many of you. Let's talk first about Android system patterns. So these patterns can be used consistently for creating strong navigation and flow. So we'll start with the up button shown here. It takes the user upward in that app's hierarchy until they get to the home screen, taking users through all the previous screens they viewed. The back button, that works differently to the up button, because whereas the up button has users remaining in your app, the back button navigates in reverse chronological order through all the history of the recently viewed screens, whether or not that's in the same app. The back button does other things as well. It dismisses floating windows, such as dialogues or pop-ups. It dismisses contextual action bars and removes the highlight from selected items, and hides the on-screen keyboard, so you don't have to navigate back through those things. So those are some of the main kind of like system patterns for Android. So let's now look at some material design things that can happen that help with navigation. So there are many different elements that can help with navigation and flow in material design, both for the web and for apps. Starting with top tabs, this is likely to be quite familiar to you. It's a very useful navigation element, and users can switch between different categories of content easily with top tabs. So it's good when you have not that many categories of content, few top-level views. It provides a very good mechanism for promoting awareness as well as the alternative views within your app. So this illustration shows some of the different types of top tabs. And we find that using a label and an icon works best. We'll talk more about that in a little while. It's also possible, of course, to provide a bottom navigation bar. And as with top tabs, it enables frequent switching between views and promotes awareness of alternate views. On mobile devices, the bottom navigation is located in a very ergonomic position. And we see that young people are more used to holding their mobile devices with one hand and therefore getting to these bottom navigation bars very easily. But what if your app has a lot of categories of content? In other words, ideally, you'd have lots of these different tabs, but it's not really functional. Well, so then we can use the navigation drawer. It enables quick navigation between views that perhaps are unrelated in this case. And it also allows for a deep navigational structure. And it can reduce the visibility of infrequently visited destinations, which is helpful in some cases. This is nested navigation when we have a hierarchy in the content we wish to display. It's a deep navigational structure with many different views. And this also enables very quick navigation between unrelated views, so it's an advantage when you have these unrelated views. And what do you do if you have this deep navigational hierarchy? Well, the navigation drawer also enables you to expand that hierarchy. The drop-downs open up the hierarchy. Some apps start off with that navigation expanded on the first view of mobile, so people can see what's there. Now, this is embedded navigation, and when we talk about this, we're talking about a directly expandable surface. So this calculator, in this example, it uses an accessible panel to be a navigation aid to a supplemental view. So this image has the navigation panel expanded, the function panel, and it overlays a standard keyboard. In the collapsed state, what you would see is kind of a peak of that, so that the user knows that they can expand it. That's kind of the embedded portion. So it's not formally using tabs or bottom navigation, for example, to label that content. It's just directly expandable in the surface. That's another element of material design. Floating action buttons. These allows users to action the most common or primary action on the screen for that screen in the application. And the icon may be animated. The floating action button, it animates onto the screen as an expanded piece of material by default. So here we see the floating action button used for sharing and used to add something here, to add a note. And perhaps for play or pause in this application here. And lastly of these, gesture navigation. It enables users to navigate between content using different gestures. Users can swipe to navigate between sibling or peer views. The gestures include touching and dragging the screen horizontally left and right or vertically up and down and zooming out. So when do you use this? Well, this is recommended when you do have related content, right? It's for sort of naturally ordered relationships, such as pages representing consecutive calendar days, or views with very few siblings, or views of similar content types. So that's gestural navigation. So let's recap. These are the material design navigation elements we've reviewed. We looked at top tabs, bottom navigation bar, navigation drawer, the nested navigation, the expanded navigation drawer, and we looked at embedded navigation. We also looked at the floating action button and expanded navigation. So you can find out more about these within the material design guidelines online. Now, over the last few years, we've completed many user research studies to develop 3 sets of mobile design principles. That's 75 design principles in all that we've created. And we did many user tests for this, and we wanted to do user testing at this scale as Google, because we knew we'd be releasing these principles to developers and designers around the world, and we wanted to be really sure that these principles released would be robust and based on this kind of user knowledge that we'd done through these testing procedures. So our user studies took place in our usability labs. Participants were prompted to visit and perform a key conversion task for 6 different apps or sites during their session. Each session that we brought users in for lasted an hour to an hour and a half per person. And we had participants bring in their own smartphones to conduct the task so that the phone that they had was not unfamiliar to them. And both iOS and Android were used in the studies in equal proportion. So they worked through tasks on the site or the app, and the method we used was traditional usability testing with Think Aloud protocol. So that's when the facilitator asks a question. So in the case you see here, the facilitator is asking for them to order dinner for tonight. And the participant speaks out loud as they're doing the tasks. And what this does, it provides us with insight into their understanding and provides us with details about when they get stuck or lost. We can very much see what's happening. And this is what makes it different than collecting your logs data or survey work that's about attitudes and not really about observing behavior. So for the 3 studies, we conducted around 250 usability sessions. And we did this in collaboration with a third-party company called AnswerLab. They're a usability company. We tested 100 mobile sites. For the app study, we tested 100 apps. And for a study specifically focused on retail, we tested apps and sites, and we tested 50 of each. And the participants had longer sessions for the latter. We really wanted to get in depth. We had an hour and a half with each participant. So the sites or apps tested ranged from large retailers through information providers and service providers. And we looked at many different types of services like travel and e-commerce. We looked at groceries and purchasing groceries. We looked at news sites. We looked at food ordering. We looked at the category of home and garden, transportation, lead gen services such as insurance, and more. So those are just some examples of what we looked at. We wanted to keep it very broad. So you can get to all of the principles that we resulted from these studies. So if you want to be able to get to them, I suggest you take out your phones and take a picture of the links. And so this was for the principles of mobile web design, the principles of mobile app design, and the principles for retail, which were based on studies, as I mentioned, for both mobile web and app. And the reason we've got 2 links for each of the first 2 was because we produced a second set. They're the same principles, but the second link for each of the first 2 has developer resources embedded in there, so links to APIs and code snippets and so forth. So the first ones you can pass on to your non-coding colleagues. They're nicely and cleanly presented, and then the second ones have got these links in for developers. So let's pull from a few of these principles in order to understand a bit more about navigation. So let's start with talking about those user experiences that can really stop users in their tracks. They're really fundamental. And so when implemented incorrectly, they stop that navigation and flow and often lead to users abandoning the experience. So this is when you see drop-off. The first one is allowing users to browse your content before asking them for personal information. So before you ask them to sign up or register or collect other kinds of personal information from them, it's important to provide them with an excellent experience so they can become a real enthusiast about your product. And users abandon sites, we find, or our apps when the product asks them to provide this personal information up front, unless, and we've kind of seen this in recent years, there's some sort of immediate payoff that users are really clear about. So things like the car service or food delivery information, most users understand now that if I'm going to ask for that and want that, then obviously they're going to need some personal information from me. In particular, apps, though, with a low brand recognition and those where the value proposition is unclear, or those where that personal information really isn't needed, they need to clear a higher hurdle when they ask for people to register. So only ask users to register if it's essential. So we can see here that the user's being asked to register straight off. That doesn't go down well. But here they can get into the experience. Let's go back one. They can get next to experience and they can register later on, much later in the flow. So this one is similar. It's all about putting a barrier in between people's experience. And the guidance here is like, don't let promotions steal the show. It's often us that are more interested in making that promotion to users and not the users themselves. So specifically here, we're showcasing promotional institutions for apps on your mobile website, right? Recommending the customer download your app. So instead of something that you see like this on the left-hand side, a better option is to go with a small banner that doesn't interrupt the user experience that your user is having on your site. However, your best bet, rather than even this, is to make a fantastic mobile web experience, particularly with progressive web apps, capabilities where users can add to home screen, work offline, and more. So just adding some data to this example, I can give you some data from Google+. A couple of years ago, our Google+ team showed that including such an experience with this kind of friction led to 69% of users simply abandoning the whole experience with Google+ at that point. That's a huge drop-off, right? So they knew about this principle, but they kind of didn't believe it, and they wanted to look at the data. So that's what they found. And here it was. This is what it looked like. And the team changed to a much smaller, less intrusive app banner at the time that looked like this. And that resulted in a direct increase of one-day active users by 17%. So that was pretty significant. And now they don't have a banner at all on their site. They went with the idea of simply providing a great experience on each platform, no matter what the user wanted to use. That's what the users come for. So now they have a great mobile web experience and a great app experience. And then the third of these that provide these barriers to people is about permissions. And I think you've probably talked a little bit about this at this conference already. It's really important to get this right. Users can get stuck in a task when they deny permissions that are integral to the proper functioning of the app. And they often do this when permissions are asked out of context. So often we ask permissions at the beginning of the experience in the app, and users don't know what they're asking for, and they often deny them. So to mitigate this, apps should ask for permissions in context and also communicate the value the access will provide to the user so the user understands it. And this is possible in both iOS and Android. And for Android, it was enabled back when Android M was made available 2 years ago. So make that permission request directly relevant to the task, and the user will be more likely to grant it. So let's have a look. On the left, you see that the user is asked right up front when they open this app, this e-commerce app. They want to use a location. It's a poor experience. Often people will say no because they don't have the context for it. In this one, they are in the app, they're using it, and at this point, they want to search for a store, so they click this button. And it's a much more obvious to the user why they're being asked for this permission at this time. So that's the last of those experiences that really stop users in their tracks. Now, note that you might only get one chance when you ask for permissions, so it's important to surface them when there's the best possibility of them being accepted, as very few users will work out how to change their settings once they've blocked a permission. If we look at Chrome data, some analysis there has shown that users ignore or temporarily dismiss permission prompts more than 90% of the time. So in Chrome 63, permissions are going to become modal. This makes users 5 times more likely to accept or deny requests rather than temporarily dismissing or repeatedly ignoring them. So that's a change that's going to be happening. So you've heard much at this conference about the importance of loading the home page and other pages fast. We've talked a lot about speed. Well, once that page is loaded, they better have really key calls to action. Of course, this is important for mobile web and apps. It's about figuring out the primary purpose of your site or your app for your users. And in our studies, we tested some sites that we came across that had similar calls to action like this. Try it now, or learn more. And I've still seen these kind of things more recently, but it's just not clear enough. It's just too vague for the user, and the user can't be convinced of what they came for. So the design on the right here is a lot more clear to the user. If you're going to a real estate site, then you're likely to be there for renting or buying or selling. So figure out those key calls to action for your product and feature them really prominently. And this is something you can find out through user testing too. Sometimes we're so embedded in our products, we can't recognize it ourselves. So secondary content and calls of action can be addressed either further down the screen or behind menu icons. And we've talked about the use of a navigation drawer and other ways to surface those navigational elements. Now, when we think of menus, a lot of thought has to be put into organizing and labeling menu categories to be user-friendly. So first of all, menus should be short. No user's going to want to really scroll through long menus on mobile, right? But in addition, our studies have shown that if we don't think really carefully about those menu categories, then we don't reflect users' mental model of those categories for your topic area. So this is where the user research activity of doing a card sort can come in, so that we can get into the minds of users and have them sort the topics in the category, and across a number of users, see how those fall out. And it might be quite differently than the way that we would organize it. It helps reveal the best structure for the organization of our content. So I give the example here. We saw things like this in our studies, where here the menu categories have kind of muddled both the product and the activities. And so this creates a conflict in users' minds. So if they're looking for like men's hiking boots, is that in men's footwear or is it in hiking? Okay? So think about your categories like this. On the right-hand side, we see that they've just focused on the activities, so much cleaner, and it doesn't give users this kind of conflict in their minds. Now, providing text labels and visual keys to clarify visual information is really important. So let's take a look at this. We have some icons here, and they're unlabeled. So just in your head, think about what you think they might be for when you're booking a flight. Just take a little moment. What would that plane be for? And the check mark, and the star, and the person. Have you labeled them all? Okay. All right, so let's take a look. Think to yourself whether this is what you thought. So the first one we've got is trips. The second one is book. The third one is club, like the airline club. And the fourth one is account. Some of you probably got that one correct. That's a bit more standard. But we really found, despite thinking that some of these icons are super, super common, that generally when we're testing them without labels, it isn't the case. And so it's surprising. Things that you think would be common, like icons for menu, or cart, or account, or even store locator, were quite often muddled by participants. And also labels for, it's important to label actions as well, like filtering and sorting. These weren't universal. You might think they are, but they're not necessarily well understood across apps. So icons that are labeled are much more likely to be used appropriately, and this can help in navigation. And then being responsive with visual feedback is important, so that users know the results of their action. So when users add an item to the cart or submit an order, the lack of feedback can cause them to question whether their action has been processed or not. Apps that provide a visual animation or another type of visual eliminate the guesswork for the user. And you can see this here in the positive example. This is a negative example here. Nothing happens, basically. But we have a toast or a snack bar element popping up to give the user this information that an item's been added. And then lastly, we're going to look at transitioning between apps and the mobile web, and where that's important, and you have to do it, making it frictionless. So here we see users checking in for a flight. In this app, they're moving them to the mobile web, but the experience really disjointed and has a very different look and feel. In the good example, the designer has really thought about this. The teams have worked together. Often it's different development teams, and the experience is much cleaner. Again, this is a navigational thing. It's best to try not to move people from one platform for another, but when you really need to do it, make sure that it's speedy, and the benefit, in contrast to any remaining friction, is worthwhile. So just to recap again, remove the barriers, registration, promos, permissions. Those are the things that can stop users in their tracks. Create great key calls to action. Organize and label your menu categories. Provide labels to clarify visual information. Be responsive with your visual feedback. And make app-to-web transitions frictionless. All right. So here again, if you didn't take a picture of it last time, are those mobile web principles. And remember, the second of each of these links have additional resources added for you. So that brings me to the end of the principles we're going to talk through. Let's talk about the benefits of user research. So your apps and your sites need user testing. Your product isn't an exception, so if you haven't done it so far, I'm telling you need to do that, because we always learn something. You can start small, though. Start by understanding the user journey. This is really important. This one is for the process of buying coffee. We're looking at new customers and existing customers, and it's important to understand that current process so you can get into their mental model and understand that, and see how those experiences might map or not map to your experience and what they're going to get muddled with. So iterate on the designs, the content, the navigation, the flow, and the usability. I want to give you an example. I have a user researcher on my team at Google who worked on this product, Ario. It's the food and home service ordering app that's launched here in India, and it's quite active here in Bangalore. She did many studies of food and home service ordering in India as the team iterated on their early concepts to get the app right. The research that she conducted helped the team understand the experience they needed to build to fit in with users' lives. Specifically, we tested the one on the left. This was not our release product. It exposed all the services that Ario offered. She conducted usability studies and found that people just could not get a quick overview in their heads of everything that was offered. We felt that they could, like design-wise, it feels like that, right? But when we actually user tested it, we couldn't do that. Users couldn't do that. So she also did a card sort that helped with grouping. It helped with renaming some of the categories, and it helped with localizing the category content and the service provided. And all that design work resulted in the design you see today, because for testing, that was found to work well for users. And in addition, the research helped to identify where the imagery needed to be localized. Things like within these drawn diagrams here, there was the inclusion of meat and alcohol, and we decided to exclude those in the end. And we also decided to make the color palette more vibrant. So if your app or site already exists, it's still important and helpful to understand user journeys, both with and without your technology. This really helped for our Ario product as well. And you also need to test your app and site. And while, yes, there's all sorts of biases for testing with family and friends, it really is like a suitable place to start if you've never got started before. And it can lead you to that aha moment. So say in your data you're seeing a drop-off. This can often be the aha moment. You realize why they don't understand the label that's on the button, or you have some other insight. And as your testing gets more mature, you can iron out some of those biases in your testing if you're testing with family and friends, and start to do this more formally and with proper screening procedures to get the right participants in. And to help you get started in user testing, we've got some great resources. Again, you might want to take a photo of this link. Google Ventures, the venture capital arm of Google, has done a lot of supporting startups through doing user research, and they have a lot of great resources at this link. So I want to sum up this talk. The story of mobile web and apps is still evolving. I think it's really, really exciting. We're looking to see where it's going to go next, and we're working to make sure that the experience on both platforms is really as best as we can make it, and making up for those deficiencies that the platforms have. So they're getting to be much more comparable. For example, both platforms can deliver a speedy user experience. The web, service workers, and the Cache API and other technologies can provide a really reliable experience, whether that's on stable 4G or poor sort of 3G networks. Both platforms can support the functionality to take photos, for instance, and the use of location services and more for both platforms. They're available on the mobile web as well as apps. For native apps, there are many ways in which these are becoming more discoverable, because that's been the big issue for apps, right? From being surfaced on Google Search and in our ad formats on Search now as well, so both in organic and in ads, as well as obviously being in display ads, and through to the affordances and the capabilities that we're having with instant apps to have that instant experience without needing to download. So the most important thing for development teams to focus on, though, is to create experiences that are best for users, whether that's web or native app design. And in this talk, we've reviewed some of the best practices for mobile design and provided links to more so that you can follow these best practices for your design and development work. And remember to conduct your user research to improve the mobile experience you're building. Start with understanding that user journey and design with that in mind, and then iteratively user test to provide you and your team with the best opportunity to create a really fantastic, the best experience in your vertical for your users. So that ends our look at user experience design and navigation patterns for today. If you want to get in touch, I'm going to be around afterwards in the mobile and web design area. And we're going to be offering one-on-one feedback on your native app or your mobile web app. So you can come along to that area and we can chat. And you can contact me at any time on Twitter at JennyLG. And I want to thank you so much for your time today. Thank you.